This is Q&A with Dima. It's my program, Transformation, Art of Reinvention in the Time of the Pandemic. Now with Steven Isserlis, who is my neighbor. We literally live about 5-minute walk from each other. And we take walks now in this pandemic, so we see each other more often than normal. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Steven here. It's really a great treat. I'm looking forward to our program.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, of course, I mean, the obvious question would be that you've probably never been at home as long as the last year. Now it's been more than a year. So is there anything that's changed in your life and any positive things that you've learned about yourself, you've accomplished, or what would you, if you look back a year, what has it been?
I don't think I've learned anything about myself, but then I never do. But I have learned a few pieces I probably wouldn't have learned otherwise, definitely, in fact. And I've written a book that I wouldn't have written. I sort of thought of writing it, but I never would have done it. But because I had all this time, I could do it, because it was a very time-consuming book to write, even though it's only about 200 pages. It took a lot of research, a lot of time, about the Bach suites. So.
The Bach suites, the Bible, the cello Bible, the equivalent of cello Bible, because we have our own Bibles and others in partitas.
I wouldn't swap
No, but I think we're quite happy with 6 of those, and I think you're quite happy with. So, but you meant to write that book before the pandemic, or how did it come about?
More actually, I wanted to make a film about the Bach suites. Using some of the ideas, and then that doesn't seem to be happening. This hasn't happened yet. So then I was just practicing the Bach suites for pleasure during the first lockdown. I thought I must get back to these. I haven't played them for some time, and then I don't know, just sitting there, I thought I read about these pieces all the time and read everything I can. Maybe I should write a book. And then my friend at Faber's was very enthusiastic about the idea, so I started doing it.
Great.
And now I'm waiting for the proofs to come in, so it's basically finished.
It's basically ready. And it will be in real form or in online form?
No,
in real form.
Probably, I mean, I'm sure it'll be in Kindle as well, but I don't know about you. I prefer books.
Yeah, these days, I think we talked about it at on some of our walks, but the ones I like sometimes are audiobooks, and it would be interesting for you to narrate it.
Well,
and maybe
that'd be difficult, that one, because it's so detailed, and you'd have to have music examples and things.
Yeah.
Who knows?
That could be an interesting project, because you certainly can provide any music examples that they.
Maybe I'd love my children's books to be on audio book, because
how many have you written? Talk about it.
I've written 2 books for children a long time ago, and then 1 book of advice with a co-author called Robert Schumann. We wrote advice for young musicians, but that's different. That's not children. That's young musicians.
Yes.
2 books for children: Why Beethoven Threw the Stew, and Why Handel Waggled His Wig.
And, how wonderful!
My son, really.
Great.
Nice.
Now, tell me. Let's go back, because we met when you were still very young, and you're still young, of course, at heart. And but we've got, compared to me in any case, yes, and we've got a lot of gray just to look more distinguished, but at heart we're still little kids. But before I met you, talk about your background, talk about your grandfather and the whole sort of musical line in your family, where you came from, and how did music play such an important role early on?
Well, my grandfather was a fairly famous Russian pianist and composer. But I mean, he composed small pieces. They're beautiful, though. A friend of mine has made a disc of them. But he was mostly known as a pianist. And he was Russian. He studied piano with Safonov. He also studied composition with Taneyev.
Wow.
And this would have been, Taneyev was Tchaikovsky's favorite student and great friend.
Of course.
And so my grandfather would have been studying with Taneyev maybe 15 years after Tchaikovsky died, or something, or less. No, actually, probably less. So, I mean, the stories he must have heard about Tchaikovsky, I wish I'd known my grandfather better. He died when I was 9, and he was always very ill when I remember him. But, yes, so that's amazing. And he knew sort of Rachmaninoff, I think, and Scriabin. He played for Scriabin. In fact, Scriabin arranged his only tour of America, what turned out to be his only tour of America.
Really?
Scriabin wrote a letter recommending him.
How wonderful.
So he was, and then my grandfather was born in Kishinev. Then he became, I think, the youngest ever gold medalist at the conservatoire in Moscow.
Fantastic.
Vladimir Ashkenazi told me there's a student who used to stand by the notice board with all the gold medalists' names, thinking, what a strange name, Isserlis. Where does that come from? Anyway, and then, so my grandfather met my grandmother in Odessa. She came from a well-to-do Jewish family who had their own summer concerts, including their own orchestra, I think. And I played there as a little boy. Kusevitsky, my grandmother, remember him playing a Mozart violin concerto on the double bass. It was stunning. And Heifetz played and sounded and looked like a little angel, she said. And my grandfather played there, and somehow, he and my grandmother fell in love. So my father was born in Odessa in 1917. Not the best year to choose for him to be born in Odessa, and then they moved to Moscow, where my grandfather became professor, and he toured around Russia with Anatoly Brandukov, who was the dedicatee of the Rachmaninoff Sonata, and they used to play the Rachmaninoff Sonata together. Anyway, but then in 1922, Lenin gave permission, or rather ordered, 12 Soviet musicians to tour abroad for 6 months with your families, show the world what a cultural oasis the Soviet Union is, which was a great idea, except that not one of the 12 ever went back. And then he was going to go to America again, but then he settled in Vienna because he gave successful concerts there.
Do you know who were the others?
Maybe Shaliapin might have been another one. I've wondered that.
Really, at that time?
I think so, but I could be wrong with that. I believe that.
Yeah, because Horowitz and Petigorsky, they left later.
Yeah, they were young.
They were younger. Yeah, but that's interesting. Shaliapin could have been at that time, 22. And Kusevitsky probably was already in Paris because he was very active even before the revolution. He's one of the least, every musician knows him or should know him because he was an incredible catalyst in Russian culture, in French, because he's the one who did Saison Russe. In Paris, he commissioned Ravel the orchestration for the pictures.
Wow.
He gave him the score, the piano score, and everything, and many other things. And in the meantime, he got a position in Boston, and for a while he did both Paris and Boston. And Boston was known to have many French musicians in there among the principal players. And so eventually he went there, and then of course he built Wood and taught Leonard Bernstein, and was a great. Also, he commissioned some of the biggest pieces in the 30s, 40s. Bartok Concerto for Orchestra in Britain, and I mean, an incredible catalyst of 3 major cultures. Music culture. Russian, French, and America. So I'm sure he was probably already. But the fact that your grandma heard him play Mozart concerto, that's extraordinary on the double bass.
And one of his, I think maybe his lead, or one of the second violins, I think, was Charles Martin Loeffler, who wrote some wonderful music and is the dedicatee of one of my 2 favorite 20th century cello sonatas. Second Fauré Sonata. That's dedicated to Loeffler, who was in the Boston Symphony. A very good composer, wonderful.
Yes. Loeffler, exactly. There was a big French Boston connection for some reason. In particular,
incredible.
Yeah. That's a wonderful story, and that's how you ended up. Your father was stillborn.
Grandfather was in Then all the Russian musicians used to visit them in Vienna. My father remembered sort of Joseph Hoffman coming to practice in the place, and Levin as well. They both came to visit my grandfather and even had to practice there. And Milstein used to come for dinner every time he was in Vienna, and so on. So no, but of course then 1938 came, and so it just so happened that my grandfather had been invited for his first tour in England the week after the Anschluss. So he came, and of course he stayed, but it took months to get my father and my grandmother here. So it must have been a very tense few months, during which some very rich lady fell in love with my grandfather, and his agent here said, "Oh, divorce your wife, she'll be fine in Vienna. Marry this woman and she'll make a great career for you." I'm glad to say my grandfather ignored the advice and moved agents.
Yeah, but it was also very, very, very lucky in many ways that he was able to get them from at that time.
And then, of course, my father had to go to the internment camp in the Isle of Man, where he shared a room with Peter Schudloff and Norbert Breinin. And they arranged the Mendelssohn concerto because my father was a very keen amateur violinist. They did a version of it for 2 violins and viola for my father. They used to play it together in the Isle of Man. So yes, history there. A sad thing. Well, I remember visiting my grandmother in her old people's home. It's a very sad old people's home in Hampstead. And one day, I still remember, she reached up into her cupboard. These incredible letters from Casals, who my grandfather loved. He wrote a piece for him. And Rachmaninoff, and I think Glazunov and people. They were all there. And after I guess they just got thrown away by mistake after she died. They were all gone. So sad.
That is.
You told me that story. I told you the story about Prokofiev telling my grandfather a rather rude story, and you told me what the Russian word was. And I always forget it. I must write it down. You know, I told you. Remember the story? Sorry. Macadamia.
If it's with a rude word, we'll probably do it after the program. I know. Russian root. Yeah. But I also told you about the Prokofiev story when he first came to Odessa as a visiting composer. He was being wooed by the Soviets to come back because he left Russia in 1918, right after not Kusevitsky. Now we talked about Kusevitsky, but Lunacharsky, rather, the Commissar of the Arts. He was talking to Mayakovsky. Prokofiev was there at a certain gathering and said, "We create revolution in politics, you create revolutionary poetry, and you write revolutionary music." Right? At which point Prokofiev asked for the permission to go to America for a while. And he always kept the Soviet passport. He never lost it in all the years until he came back to settle in 1935.
Not a great move on his part.
Not a great, but considering what he wrote when he was back, that may be compensated. He was on a big tour and came to all the big cities, including Odessa. And Stolarsky wanted, of course, to demonstrate his, to show off his best student. So that best student played his first violin concerto, at which point Prokofiev at the end said, "Young man, you're playing it all wrong." He jumped on stage and started giving him a lesson and everything. And that was it. And then he forgot about it. When he settled back, became good friends with David Oyster. Oyster asked him, said, "Sergei Sergeyevich, do you remember that visit?" Said, "Yes, I remember." "Oh, he played totally wrong." Said, "That was me."
Story. Similar story, not similar story, but my grandfather was touring also Russia, and he gave a concert, and a friend of his who was a piano teacher in the town invited him to dinner afterwards. Russian was so hospitable, and he said, "Look, I got a student who I think is quite talented. Would you mind listening to him after dinner?" Okay. And the boy sat down, played Metner Sonata, and Metner was a great friend of my grandfather's. And after he played, my grandfather turned to the teacher and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, your boy is not talented. He's a genius." And that was Horowitz.
That's not bad. That's pretty good.
That's distracted here by Macadamia the cat, my son's cat.
Yeah.
Staring at me. very intensely. Anyway,
Yeah,
yes. So, oh, the Russian. I love all these Russian connections.
yeah. There are
Oh, you
lots of
the
it.
first. I can't remember. You did something for the first time. Some Russian musician hadn't done before. Going back to Moscow or
Oh,
something.
yeah, yeah. I went back to Soviet, well, to what still was Soviet Union as the first emigre. Yeah, that was a
Yes.
most memorable trip in December '88. Yes, and my mom came along, and we did
Yeah.
number of concerts. It was almost like a festival. It was something you don't forget because first of all, when I was leaving, I never thought I'd see anybody again from my family, and all my friends, and then only 11 years later, but so many things happened.
Yeah.
And then soon after that, I think Volodya came Ashkenazi, and then a year later came Slava, which was of course
So
was.
that must have been after Soviet time. But
Yeah, yeah, it was, yeah. And then of course, and now it's so many changes. It's
yeah.
better if we, yeah, just talk about culture, because cultural heritage, this is something that we managed to smuggle inside because nothing was allowed. I couldn't take my violin or anything. Even I came out without a bow.
Oh.
Georg Gertnagel, the old
Yeah.
manager who never we never worked together, but he knew my uncle, he knew the family. He smuggled a bow and met me in Vienna and gave me a bow. But
Wonderful.
I came out with a like factory violin. None of this. I mean, my violin was smuggled 2 years later by the Borodin Quartet. The
Wow.
second violinist played it all the way uh, through the tour, and then I came to see them in New York, and he said, "I will, as long as I live, I will never forget how you came to see a violin." In 2 years, I hadn't seen it. Was Andrea Guarneri? He said, "You kissed it, and then you played a few more notes, and it just, it sounded like that was the love affair that ever was." And then I
Dog
came
grew
to him.
enchanted with its owner.
Oh, I recognize the owner. Anyway, there were many extraordinary, because of all the wall and the whole the you know the music, of course, that was born out of this extraordinary political upheavals.
To put it politely.
Was the great beneficiary, yeah, of it, because Prokofiev and Shostakovich, and if you look at the output or the influence. These days, of course, everything has to relate to sport. But if you make a team of the great Russian composers of the 20th century only, that would be hard to beat by any other culture, by any other team.
I suppose
You
so.
know,
Yeah.
you you'd have to have Rachmaninoff,
Yeah.
Medtner, uh, Prokofiev, Shostakovich, then of course Khachaturian, if you consider, but he was a Soviet, he was, and then you have Shchedrin, you have Schnitke, you have Denisov, you have Gubaidul, and so on and so forth. That's a very
Yes.
impressive, impressive number. And
Yes.
if we talk about somebody like Kusevitsky, how he influenced, there were other people who were also, but I wanted to ask you now, uh, going back to your roots. So you obviously didn't have much of a choice but to become a musician because you were surrounded by
That's true.
your
Yeah.
mother's side,
Yeah.
because
My
you talked
father's
about.
side obviously had, and also we have sort of vague connections to Mendelssohn and Karl Marx and
Oh,
Helena Rubinstein.
wow.
On my mother's side, there was also, although her parents, my grandmother was the most tone deaf person I think I've ever known, just about. My mother's father, whom I didn't really know, he liked music, but she studied piano in Geneva, and
Uh-huh.
are also descended some from Lewandowski, great Jewish composer, and my mother sort of didn't really make it as piano. She taught piano. She was a piano teacher, but I think if you get a slightly frustrated Jewish mother, it sort of propels you into music, I think. And my sisters are both musicians. Annette's a violist, Rachel's a violinist. So, yes, and our dog used to sing so beautifully. So it was a musical family. Yeah.
Wonderful. And the choice of a cello in particular, was it sort of your choice, your parents? How did that
Rachel,
happen?
my sister Rachel was already playing the violin. I think they knew Annette, although Annette was playing the piano when I was a little boy, but I think they knew already she would play the viola. So the
Uh-huh.
cello was needed, and we, as a family, used to play piano quintets.
Of
My
course.
mother on the piano, my father first violin, Rachel second, Annette viola, which wasn't the greatest success in the world. Slightly dysfunctional, but it was a good thing we could do it. And music was just in the family. It still is. Annette and Rachel and I, we know all the same people because we all move in the music world. It keeps the family very, very close to all to be doing the same thing, and we have very similar taste. And we studied, we had the same influences pretty much, and so yeah.
So you never contemplated becoming anyone else except professional musician. That was sort of predestined.
Unless we failed, yes. I mean, which was a question.
Well, there was all that possibility, but but in your case, I don't think that was in the cards. But I mean,
I didn't really.
Yeah, but
my career didn't start to take off really till I was at least 30. So I suppose it
really,
started.
you think that late?
Yeah, I would say so.
But when we met, now let me think, because we met late 80s, right? Or somewhere. I moved to London in 87.
I was born at the end of 87.
Yeah.
So I was in my very late 20s. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So
I was
for
there
me,
when you conducted your first concert. I was in the audience.
Correct. It was 30. Now it will be 31 years ago. Unbelievable. You were there. Yes. But I remember your first appearance at that festival, and you played with Olli. I think must have been 88, a couple of years before. Yeah, with Olli Mustonen, and it was just something quite unique, revelatory. There was a freshness and vitality of.
I remember that occasion. I remember you were really, really nice about it. I thought I played like a pig.
No, but I meant it. I was really, really taken by it, by that whole, because I grew up obviously among the pretty good cellists, the Rostropovich, Shafran, of course. Shafran used to be our, absolutely. He used to come and play with my mother sonatas when I was like really little kid. Oh yeah, and I remember they played for a little, but he was a neighbor. Literally, he lived on the same floor with us for a number of years until he moved to the same apartment building where everybody else lived,
when I
very close to
place, it was out in the sticks. Remember, it was a very small.
Oh, really? He moved again.
I mean, he just died.
That was
but it was just a few months after he died, and I went to visit his widow, and Svetlana, and his daughter and granddaughter, and we had a lovely time. I really liked them. But I remember just God, the successful musicians in the West had these huge houses and things. And Shafran, my hero, was living in this little apartment.
But I remember, well, of course, how could one forget his incredible, unique sound? I mean, the sound of the cello is just something.
I know. I adored it when I first heard it when I was about 11. Then I became obsessed. And then, I took a little break, which was probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Because I was starting to imitate him much too much. And then I came back to him. And I thought I wouldn't love him as much, but I do. I love him to this day. I love his playing. Yeah. And of course, I got to know him a little bit later.
Yeah. And I remember, because, little kids know just little details, that his fingers were just full of Band-Aids, because they're
much too much.
He practiced like incessantly. I mean, and then later on, he became so neurotic that he would just not answer any phone calls like a week before the recital, and this. I mean, and then he would come out and be so incredibly nervous. I mean, it was just a bundle of nerves. But in our house, in our apartment, it was not a house, it was apartments just on the same floor, and he would come in and most glorious sounds.
And
yeah.
Unique.
So
it didn't sound like anybody else.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But then, coming back to your debut in Kosholm in '88, it was just something so, and by that time we had a pretty good collection of cellists. Prior to you was of course Misha Maisky and Boris Pergamenshkov, who we all loved to pieces. Gary Hoffman played beautifully, and also David Geringas and Marty Rossi and Truls Merck when he was not yet famous or well known. I mean, we had a pretty good collection. That Karina Georgian team and so forth. So, you stood out. You stood out because you had your voice. You had, and that whole charisma and a manner, style, all your own. So in my mind, you were famous since you were.
Sorry, he's enjoying that bit.
In my mind, you were a star since you were, early 20s. I never,
Well, I had no career. I mean, virtually no career. No, I wasn't star. Well, I probably was a star. I needed to be supported at least till my mid-20s.
Interesting. That was certainly not my perception. But anyway, let's see now. Of course, you've been, teaching a lot, because what else can we do? When we're stuck in the lockdown. But even prior to that, maybe more than normal, or about the same amount.
No, because I mean, my main teaching has been Prussia Cove, which would have happened as a course both this year and last year. We couldn't go to Prussia Cove, so both times I did various lessons on Zoom last year, and this year I've actually done them, live, face to face, 4 days of class. But apart from that, I haven't done that much. I've done the odd class, but I think no more than usual. And I played some concerts, of course, not nearly as many as usual. But the book took a lot of time, and I practiced a lot. It's great practice.
That's wonderful. And normally you like practicing? You enjoy practicing?
Yeah, I do, if it goes well.
Yeah.
I like music. So.
I've learned how to practice probably after my last competition at the age of 25 or something, and then I finally, when there was already a lot of concerts and not enough time to practice, then I finally learned how to appreciate those hours in quiet and just slowly, and the just putting together a new piece. It was almost an equivalent, I felt, because just putting fingerings or bowings for convenience is not what I would do. For me, that's already interpretation. So I would have the score and this. I love that process, and that should not be rushed.
No, it can't be rushed.
No, it cannot, because that you basically already designing your future interpretation with your fingers.
When I first learn a piece, and also when I come back to a piece, I'll spend hours at the piano.
Exactly.
And,
you play well the piano?
Terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of great.
Like me, but I love it. Yeah.
But I can pick out. Well, not from a whole orchestral score, but a piano part. I can get to know the piece. I can see which themes are which, and what's happening to them. It's essential.
Yeah.
And then I go to the cello, as you say, put in fingerings and bowings, but only when I know how I want to play the piece, basically.
Now I have a interesting question here, just on YouTube. What are your two favorite fictional stories?
You mean about anything, not about music?
No, just about anything. Yeah, fictional stories.
Oh God, well, I love Victorian novels. I just love Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins and Anthony Trollope. And I don't know if I had to choose two books. That'd be very difficult.
It's difficult, yeah.
Maybe one by a living author would be A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, which I think is just a masterpiece. But that's almost like a Victorian novel, except set in 20th century India. And then one book, I don't know, for Desert Island Discs, I chose The Complete Trollope. But I think the book I found hardest to put down was Armadale by Wilkie Collins, probably.
Really? Yeah.
But on the other hand, I couldn't live without David Copperfield and and Bleak House, and The Way We Live Now by Trollope. And anyway, so my tastes are very old-fashioned, but unusual books, there's lots. I don't know, one I keep coming back to in my mind. It's very unknown. her son's wife by Dorothy Canfield, who was American, and wonderful book. And I just keep thinking about it, although I read it 5 years ago. So anyway,
yeah, wonderful. But you don't read so much, of course, it would be in translation of the Russian authors of the 20th
well, I've read
century.
Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Turgenev.
Of course, yeah, but 20th century. Bulgakov, no.
Yeah, I've read The Master and Margarita.
Dog's Heart.
Nope, never read that.
No, oh, that's a great.
Yes, and Nabokov, I have. He's a bit too clever for me, I think.
Really?
Yes, he's an incredible writer, but I just, I sort of I felt so stupid. I read his book Pale Fire and realised at the end that I completely missed the point of the whole thing. I was so annoyed with myself that I haven't gone back to him since then. I tend to read more books in English language because it's frustrating, I think, to read things in translation, no matter how good you translate. I mean, Proust, I did get through the whole Proust, but I was very comfortable reading in translation the whole time.
Interesting. Another one. Oh, that's interesting. Does Steven ever get frustrated practicing? And what does he do when he does?
Either stop and take a break. And yes, I do often get frustrated. I was a bit frustrated today because my cello wasn't speaking properly.
Really?
Which happens. Somehow, a lot of people have that problem at the moment. It's something to do with the weather constantly changing, I think. But you just sort of, if you're playing slowly and carefully, it's difficult to get frustrated because, you're not sort of challenging yourself. If you play through too much, then you can get frustrated because it doesn't get better. Then you have to stop and fix what's wrong and just, pinpoint, diagnose what's wrong and go and just try and fix it. But yeah, I mean, of course, some days are better than others. Yesterday, I really enjoyed practicing, and today I haven't enjoyed so much. But so what?
Exactly. Do you always play your best cello, or you have several? You change sometimes.
Well, normally I play for concerts. I play the Marquis de Couperin Stradivarius, but only when I'm playing things on gut strings, which of course is 80-90% of the time. But if I want to play a concert on steel strings, then I play my own cello because the Strad, unfortunately for me, belongs, but they're very kind to lend it to me, belongs to the Royal Academy of Music. And they've lent it to me for a few years, and I told them they've lent it to me for life. And they said, no, just for a certain number of years. I said, no, because if you take it away from me, I'm going to kill myself. Therefore, for life.
That's a good one.
But on steel strings, I play the Montignano. Like if I play Shostakovich concerto or Prokofiev concerto, concerto was 58, or Dutilleux concerto, something like that. Then I'll play. And then I have a cello made. I have actually two cellos I was given by lovely makers. One of a man who just started making cellos for his grandson who was studying the cello. He started making a cello. It's very good, Clive Morris.
Good.
And then my friend Robert Brewer Young has made a copy of the Mr. Couperin. And if I have outdoor concerts, for instance, I've done it there, or I played it in Maldives. When I went to the Maldives, I took that cello and I played it on a sandbank in the Maldives at sunset, which was great for me and great visually, but not great for the cello. But Robert's cello seemed fine with it.
So, yeah, that's good. Tell me a little bit more about how did you first connected with Prussia Cove? Because I've never been there. So describe to me.
Beautiful place in the world. I first went there when I was 16 as a student. With
John de Breg was there?
Yes, it was his course. He started the whole thing. He was there. I studied with Tibor de Markila, who was quite an interesting Hungarian cellist with a slightly dodgy past. Mm-hmm. He'd been first cellist of the Berlin Philharmonic throughout the Second World War. So, but he was very charming, nevertheless. But vague, of course, vague was the reason to go there, really, because his teaching was just wonderful. When he was in a good mood, he could be horrible, just be absolutely horrible. But boy, he had a lot to say musically. I mean, I don't know if you know his recordings where he conducts Schubert symphonies. Those are among my favorite recordings of all time. Wonderful. he was just a great musician. He made the music live.
Absolutely.
And so I went there, and I was quite a success that year. Then I went back, and I was, again, they were very nice to me. And then I went back, and I went to the States, to Oberlin College for a couple of years. And I came back, and I went to open chamber music.
Oh, you did?
I went to play chamber music there, and I was a disaster. And I was banned for 3 years. I didn't behave my brilliant best, shall we say. But it was all Nigel Kennedy's fault. He tempted me into a arcade, of course, and we missed the bus back, and there was great ructions. Anyway, so I was banned for a few years, and I had to go back as a student, and then I started going a lot, and then eventually I started taking over the classes. Started to teach there, and then I became director when Vague resigned. Vague hadn't been for some years, but
which has already been how long?
I think 25 years.
How long you've been?
Yeah, 25 years.
It's a long-term part-time job, because of course it's not.
It's part-time. It's a lot of time, and I care a lot about it.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, I love the place. My parents are buried there. That's wonderful, gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'm in love with.
How far is it How far is it from London, door to door from your house?
Over 6 hours, which is great because we really go down there. It's like Hogwarts. We just sort of isolate.
Yeah, it is.
Every meal together, every lunch, dinner together. We really talk about music and get inside the music. There's no mention of careers. No much. I can't stand the emphasis today on you've got to get your Instagram account right. You've got to get your Twitter. That's all people seem to talk about. But there we talk about phrasing, and we talk about structure of the music and what the composers mind. And, there's all very different teachers teaching. They're all very different from each other. But we have certain common values. So, Gerhard Schultz.
Which is so important today. And these days, of course, when they talk about, this one is an Instagram sensation, or this, whatever that means. How do you what does it have to do with music? And if you look at it, and then you don't think they're serious. But anyway, there is a question actually related to this whole thing. What's the best way for the young performers to be heard and noticed today? Is it still competitions, auditions, now more online material like website, YouTube, and so forth?
Well, of course, one has to be practical. You can't just say, think of the music and it'll all come, because it won't. My particular path was more through other musicians than anything else. I was friends with Ollie Mustonen, who probably told you about me. And he also told me Parrott, which is my first really good agency. He got me in there. And then Joshua Bell recommended me here and there. I still play with both of those. God knows how many years, over 30 years. We've just been friends, they're among my best friends as well. And that was my path, but competitions I hate, and I never won a big one. I won a little one, which gave me various concerts at £35 a concert, which today would buy you a couple of dinners.
But you never entered big ones either. You never participated.
No.
You
what
never
happened
entered.
was I was in not a major one, but a fairly public one. The Leeds piano competition for a bit had something they called a national music platform. So I went in for that. It was public, the first round, and I was knocked out in the first round. And after that, two things happened. I never did another competition. And the Fanny Waterman, who was running the competition, scrapped it. She was so annoyed. So
she scrapped the whole program. Oh, I see.
Yeah. The whole thing was so ridiculous. Not just me being knocked out. Yes, because there were 4 cellists on the jury, none of whom liked my playing, because I hadn't studied with them and I didn't play in a way they liked or approved of. So, anyway, it was good. It didn't feel good at the time, but in retrospect, it was good. It
Closed up.
I'm not a competition player. I'm amazed that, for instance, Tchaikovsky competitions, Latimir Fung just won. In fact, the members of the jury started texting me when it happened. I couldn't believe it. He's not a competition player either. So
he studied.
Yeah.
He studied with you.
A little bit, yeah. I'm just very fond of him. He's really, his heart is in the mind in the right place. And Radu Lupu, he won two big competitions. So
exactly.
Great players can come through competitions, is my point. But I don't approve of them. I refuse. In fact, unfortunately, that was my very last contact with Shafran. He wanted me to be on the jury of the Tchaikovsky competition, of which he was then chairman. And I said, no, you didn't want to. He was quite offended, I think. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we ever.
Interesting, because he never really won any competitions except Soviet Union, which was, of course, incredibly difficult.
Joined first with Rostropovich in Prague.
Oh, joined, yeah, joined for exactly, and then maybe in Czechia, maybe in Prague. I think he won maybe
in Prague,
the Prague competition.
That's and at 14 he won a big competition. But yeah, I mean, how do you get noticed? I mean, yes, of course, have a nice website. Actually, Jasper Parrott, who was my agent for some time, he gave me a good piece of advice.
Right.
I was telling him about my ideas for chamber music series or concert series, and he said, I think this is your path forward. This is going to be the making of you, that you have all these ideas for programs. And I think in a way he was right, because then I went to Wigmore Hall, of course, endlessly, and Salzburg Festival in New York and places, and they liked my programs because I was, I love to read about composers, so I know quite a lot about what repertoire there is, chamber music and orchestral even. And so I could do these programs, and my friends like Ollie and Josh, Stephen Huff, and various people would all come and take part. And so the series are quite successful, and then you start to make a name. But I think everybody has their own different path. Is the main thing. Don't try to be like other people, and don't.
No. But I correct me if I'm wrong. I think it also is very important to be able to have an access to a big personality, to a successful artist, in order to ask questions, observe. Apprenticeship, which happens only, I think, with conductors. One of my good friends and also somebody who was on this program, Tony Papano, he spent 5 or 6 years with Barenboim, learning, of course, not only the scores, but also about the business of music and how, and could ask him any kind of questions, along the way. That access is very hard to find among the instrumentalists, isn't it? Once you stop, once you graduate from the school.
Well, I think you do that through chamber music, I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
There was, when I was growing up, there was a school of thought you shouldn't play chamber music, actually in Russia as well, because that was unbecoming for a soloist, and that's just such rubbish. I think more the opposite might be true, that it's unbecoming for a chamber music player to play solo, but neither is true, because concertos are chamber music too. And, first of all, if you're talking career-wise, probably my career has blossomed through playing chamber music with really good people, but also just musically, you just get so much from playing with people, and
absolutely,
I'm a pain in the neck. I know I am in chamber music rehearsals, but I know I give people a hard time, and if they like it, they like it, and if they don't, again. But also me, I learned so much from playing with Shandor Weigel. He was horrible to me sometimes, but boy, I learned a lot.
Was he really?
Oh, he could be awful. There was one occasion, it was actually not the most awful, but there was an famous occasion in Prussia Cove where I was talking to, I think, Melissa Phelps, the cellist, in the table. Suddenly I was drenched.
Oh, yeah.
My hair was drenched. And I looked, and there was Vague with an empty beer glass, and he'd just thrown the whole content all over my head. I think maybe he'd been imitating him. Didn't go down. Anyway, but yeah, we didn't get on brilliantly personally all the time, but I appreciated him musically, and I think he appreciated me too, that he kept getting at me, and I learned so much from him. And then, I still play via Zoom or over the phone or whatever to Kurtag. I work a lot with him, and he coaches me on his pieces, and I'm longing for him to say more and more about every note, which he's capable of doing. It's wonderful. And Ferenc Rados, I play with a lot. He's Andros Schiff's teacher. and I've learned a lot from him. And yeah, and still, of course, I'm taking my roots were my first teacher, Jane Cowan, and she'd studied with Feuermann, she'd studied with Donald Tovey. It's great pedigree.
Yeah, that's wonderful. There's a question online here, but I think I did ask you that. Yeah, it just says even maybe this question already came up. Have any of you experienced any positive changes or advantages due to the pandemic? For example, concerning your everyday musical life. I think you partially answered that, but
I've enjoyed it. I mean, I've been okay so far, touch wood, and although I'm heavily in debt, I feel, things are starting, but I'm really worried for the young musicians who are just starting to have opportunities.
Yeah.
And now, there's other young musicians would have got the same opportunities. I don't know which ones are going to get them. I mean, basically, it's going to be a 2-year hiatus in a lot of people's careers. And that's worrying. My heart goes out to them.
It's very worrying. It's heartening. Yeah. It's very difficult because, in my case, it's been very productive because I just reprogrammed myself before. I never spend more than 3 months a year in my house, but this time I spend the whole year in my house except for 3 short trips. And as a result, I just did enormous amount of transcriptions, which I normally wouldn't have had as much time for, and did a lot of things online, distant videos with my chamber orchestra, and this program, and the many interesting projects. So for me, the life in that respect, I can say that I've managed to beat the pandemic, at least on the creative side.
Yeah.
When, then when I go now on the road, it becomes just so, we talked about it, it's so strewn with unknown and difficulties, with all the tests, with all the quarantines, with all the, it's, as I said,
feels great for the concerts. I gave a few in the autumn. I did a tour with Thomas Addis of Germany, and then I gave a couple of concerts in Madrid in November. And then through the pandemic, I've so far given 3 concerts at the Wigmore. No, 4.
That's fun.
No, more actually.
4.
5 concerts, I think, because there was a time when you could have an audience for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I gave 3 recitals with Mishka Moman without audience, and I got another one next month, I hope.
Wonderful.
We can talk about that yet because it's not advertised. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then I gave 2. I did as another thing I enjoyed doing, I wrote an evening of words and music around Proust, and the actor Simon Callow read the words, and we did that. And I also did a recital earlier in the day, also to do with Proust. That was great fun. That was with a small audience. That was nice. And they've become real events for me.
Absolutely.
Those things. And then I just made a film of the Dvorak Concerto with the LPO. And it's so nice to play an orchestra. I've done a couple of things with BBC Scottish. These are wonderful orchestra. They're so nice as well. So yeah, it's the few experiences I've had have been quite positive. So that's nice. I mean, they really do feel like have felt like special occasions. And
absolutely. Also because, yeah. And of course, the audience and the musicians are so starved for making music. There's one element. I'm just curious how, because you've done a number of concerts with no audience. How is that? I mean, that is something.
It doesn't really bother me that much. People say it must feel so weird. I said no, because I'm used to playing in the Wigmore without audience when I rehearse. It doesn't feel spooky or anything, and people are listening. There's always 2 people in the hall.
Yeah.
Or 3, including the page turner.
Yeah, so there is. It's never completely empty.
Yeah. It was fine with orchestra again. With no audience, but the orchestra's there, and you want to play well for them. So there's What I haven't dared play anything.
You're fine with it.
No, I had to play something from memory for a live broadcast of the Schumann concerto. But that I found terrifying. But I always find memory terrifying. But no, I mean,
really
back at the Wigmore Hall, and it's just a very special place, and it's really it's Wigmore Hall, its reputation has just soared through the pandemic because John Gilhooly has made sure it's hardly been shut. He's just gone for it. And that's brilliant. It's like Myra Hested during the Second World War here. And he'll, the Wigmore Hall will be remembered for its life-saving attitude during this time.
Fantastic. Another question. Does Steven have musicians he wants to work with that he hasn't? The ones that you missed.
Like Carlos Kleiber, Rachmaninoff.
I
think Furtwängler. Yes, a few. I mean, that's one good thing about being around for so long. I know a lot of the musicians I really admire. There's some conductors I know, or hardly work with, or never work with. Certainly some I'd like to work with more. And people that I got to play with Radu Lupu, who's probably one of my all-time favourite players. I got to play with him in his third last ever concerts. I just got there in time. Yeah, I love Radu Lupu. As a man,
Radu is very special.
We played Schumann Romances, Opus 94. At my 60th birthday concert, we played it. That was the first time we played together in public. And then for his very last concert was in Lucerne. We did the Schumann Romances Getting Better, I must say. And I directed, sort of, the orchestra for him. And he played Mozart K488, the A major, the great A major concerto. And that was his last concert.
Yeah, of course.
It's almost too much to think about it. But it was a great honour. Who else? I'm sure there are people I haven't played with that I'd like to. I mean, certainly some pianists, yeah. But I mean, I'm pretty fond of the people I do play with regularly. I mean,
exactly. So
Joshua Bell, of course, Ollie Mustonen, Jeremy Denk. These are my regulars. Tabet Zimmerman I play with quite a lot, and now Josh and I are playing with Yevgeny Kissin, whom I've never played a concert with. So that should be very interesting. And, there are people.
Oh, definitely.
There's lots I want to do. Not time to retire or die yet, I hope.
No. Interestingly enough, you never, with your clear, predisposition to teaching, because I remember I mentioned to you once that I saw a fantastic masterclass you gave in Verbier on the Beethoven Sonata, and you know that you obviously all the years in Prussia Cove where you worked with musicians, and yet you never taught sort of at any schools, any institutions. Is it what I call when similar question is directed to me? I said, well, I kind of follow Groucho Marx. That I wouldn't want to be a member of the club that would have me as a member. Is it something similar to you? Is it
quite say that? Unless I was being falsely modest. No, there's two reasons. One, that I like you, I just travel all the time. So when I come home, I have some free time.
Exactly.
But secondly, I do think I can maybe give some helpful classes. I can talk about music endlessly. But if somebody, week to week, that's a different sort of teaching, and I really respect the sort of people who can sort out their students' physical problems and, just guide them from week to week. And I don't think I'd be very good at that. And also, I'm just too controlling, I have to say, because I have such strong views on these. I'd probably squash the poor students unless they were very, very strong. I think people are better off just having a few classes with me from time to time than week to week. As I say, and also as a teacher, you really do have to have an understanding of how technique works. And I don't really have that, and I don't want it because
you don't want to know
I played absolutely naturally, and I can't understand where I play the cello. Whereas I can't do anything else with my hands. I'm hopeless. My writing is horrible. I can't draw anything, nothing with my hands. But playing the cello is just
really.
That's with my hands.
Obviously, you were born to play that particular instrument, and that's what
I was well taught by a teacher who made it absolutely natural.
And that teacher was
Jane Cowan. And without her, I think it'd be very different. And again, people kept saying, "Oh, she's a terrible teacher. You've got to leave her." I had that all the time from famous people whom I really respected. It was
Really?
scary. Like I loved Antonio Ianigro's playing. He was fantastic. But I went to study with him, and his first thing after I played to him, he said, "Well, it's difficult for me to say anything because everything his teacher has taught him is completely the opposite of what I'd say." And then he put pressure on me to leave her and go and study with him, and I always did. And though I think he was wonderful cellist, fantastic, and I'm very fond of him as a man, but I'm very glad I didn't. Sorry, it's my grandfather clock.
Yeah, it's okay. That's good. It tells us it's 5 o'clock or close to it. Yeah.
Keeps attention once an hour.
Yeah.
And unlike me, it's once a minute. But yeah, I'm very glad I stayed with her. But it was, again, like Shafran, it was a very individual approach. But I still think her approach was very, very natural and organic, and it worked for me. It didn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
It worked. People like Stephen Doan, for instance. She helped him so much. And now he's become a great teacher. He passes on a lot of what he learned from her, as well, of course, his own thoughts. Yeah, so, and she just made music and technique the same thing, so I didn't have to think about technique.
Yeah, of course, in those, bygone days of the great years of Moscow Conservatory, which I remember, the 60s and 70s, I mean, you had an advantage of not only great teachers that taught you directly. I studied with Yankelevich and then later with Bezrodin and so on, but we could actually come, and I've done that many times, and sit in the class of Rostropovich, whose teaching talent was just as extraordinary. Some of his students think that he was maybe the most gifted for teaching. I mean, his lessons were just out of this world because he was always incredibly full of people. So it was a performance in many ways. It was a masterclass. He never played cello in his lessons. He played piano sometimes, and made most extraordinary images, and this and the fantasy was unbelievable. And so you could go in here, and then there were phenomenal piano teacher, Yakov Flier, Yakov Zak, who I learned a great deal, and also the violin teacher. You could go and listen David Oistrakh teaching when he was there, and and all of them, and Kogan, and those days. Of course, if you were, I don't remember that was the case at Juilliard, for instance, because I always went to Galamin's home, to his apartment, and there was nobody except one-on-one, and which is also important. Some lessons, I remember I went to Yankelevich's home too, but his class was just for at least 30, 40 people all the time, from all over the country, really.
Did people play chamber music there a lot? Or was that
not a hell of a lot? And not it began. There was an obligatory string quartet class, and I had a wonderful teacher in string quartet. Actually, at Juilliard, also members of the Juilliard quartet. But that was sort of obligatory, and there was a famous scene when somebody like Gidon Kremer and Misha Maisky would be standing, looking at who's coming in, and said, "Listen, would you play a string quartet examination with us in an hour? We need to pass." Anybody who played the violin needed like a second violin or something. I mean, it's kind of silly, or violas. But I remember I studied some wonderful quartets. Shostakovich 7 quartet, which would play like also in some concerts. Yeah, but not there, and of course sonatas. Sonatas, there was a class of chamber music. But it's interesting because 30s, Oyster had a trio with Knushevitsky and Oborin. Yes. They played trios.
I was just listening to
it. So it's not like, it was not completely. My father founded Tchaikovsky String Quartet with Barshai playing viola and Slobodkin on the cello, and Anton Sharoyev, who then was the head of a Kiev Chamber Orchestra, still alive at the age of 100, and I think maybe 101. It's unbelievable. I met him in the city. I mean, Anton Sharoyev. Anton Sharoyev, he was second violinist to my father. Tchaikovsky String Quartet in the mid-50s, and they played, Schumann Quintet or Shostakovich Quintet with Richter, and some of the, I mean, people did. So it was, I think, the more competition race started, a lot of string players and piano players, they would just, there was such a machine. You remember in the 50s and 60s. I mean, if the Soviet team came, there was basically no chance for anybody else to win because of the preparation and the local competitions, and it was a real sport. Like let me see. Yeah, interesting. Oh, interesting. Low. Sorry, it's just a comment. Yeah, there was a couple more before I let you go. Yeah, what do you think? How do you see the performing arts after the pandemic? How do you think it will be? Is there a chance that maybe we'll learn some things? I mean, you talk about your, but in general, the sort of the business of music. Do you see some changes, some welcome changes, some unwelcome ones? We not we.
For me, it was
Yeah.
fine. It was fine before. I think maybe there'll be less touring because there'll be less money.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Costs money. There might be less of that. Whether there will be shorter concerts without intervals, I hope not. I mean, that didn't happen after the Spanish flu, which was much more of a pandemic.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, in the immediate future, the positive thing is that everybody will be just delighted to get back to live music. I mean, like when I gave the concerts in the Fidelio Cafe last summer, that was
yeah.
idea. I call it the Wigmore Hall of Cafes. It's wonderful. And I gave the first concert there, I played Bach Suites, and people were because they not only had they not heard live music, they hadn't been out for dinner for 3 months or something, and it was just such an atmosphere. And I hope we'll have a lot of that when people start to go back, and then I think things will start to slot back into normal mode. I would think. But who knows? I could be wrong. It could be.
Yeah. But also hopefully because composers been composing more as before, because I know a couple of composers that been composing operas because they were commissioned. Leonid Desятnikov, who was very much on my mind because I transcribed his Bukovina preludes, but also Alexander Raskatov, who I met actually only online, and he did a program where he's writing a major opera of Animal Farm, Orwell's. Yeah, for the Amsterdam Opera. So I'm just hoping that maybe we will have also maybe more interesting music written as a result of this.
It's funny, I thought of it when you said that 20th century Russia produced more as much as I think actually not very proud of a lot of what Britain is doing at the moment, but I think the composers, we never had so many fantastic composers as we've got today.
Exactly.
Wonderful, but that was true before the pandemic. I mean, there probably will be. A
friend
of mine told me yesterday, he said he thinks streaming is here for good. He thinks there's a great thing about it, that you can have interviews, you can present the music, you can talk about it. He says it'll go alongside concert life much more than it used to. Maybe he's right. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible.
And also smaller venues, before it becomes, again, more massive, more numbers in big halls. But now venues that are beginning to start the chamber music series where they don't depend so much on the numbers, because so much that was wrong in the music business was as soon as it became the game of numbers, then it immediately went off.
Yes, I know. I think halls are sometimes just much too big. I'm very happy in a hall. One has to play in the big halls, one does, but still, I love the experience of playing in a hall the size of the Wigmore Hall, or even size of the Fidelio.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And
even there, because you have that, and that exchange of energy that we miss so much with the live audience. It sometimes is. Not sometimes, but often more intense in a smaller venue, because you literally
and maybe
talk about it.
New venues will spring up. Like my son Gabriel, he's got this company that finds new venues for all the arts. Tutti dot space it's called. But I mean,
wonderful. Talk about it a little bit.
Amazing spaces in London I didn't know existed. Incredible. I mean, a whole 400 people, whatever.
Exactly.
Maybe they'll start to come up. Who knows? I mean, we really don't know. We just pray that there's not a new strain that puts us back to square one. But if there isn't, let's hope we'll gradually get back to normal, amplified.
Amplified, yeah, with amplified emotions at least,
Exactly.
and the desire.
Excitement. I don't mean sound-wise.
Exactly.
I mean,
No, no, no,
more
no.
because people will appreciate it more. We hope. That's the positive hope.
Exactly. Well, that's a great note to wrap up. And thank you so much, Stephen. I hope we make more talks on our walks. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining and making. Of course, and see you on the corner of our two roads as we often do.
I'm now going to pour this water away because while we were talking, Macadamia the cat came and drank out of my water. Some people know no bounds.
Oh, she did. Oh.